world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is November 14th as you are listening to this. And of course, we have more information coming out with the Epstein files. Donald Trump has now gone just over 40-ish hours, I think, as I'm recording this, without responding to the Epstein files. He's gone completely silent. Now, what could that mean? Well, either Donald Trump is trying to come up with something ridiculously clever and he's putting more thought into it than anything he has ever done before. He's resigned to the fact that he's just trying to ignore it and hoping it goes away. Or maybe his handlers have gotten access to his phone, so he can't tweet things out or put them out on Truth Social. It's entirely possible that somebody has gotten to him and said, do not answer any questions, because we have to come up with a way to get around this. And that's why he's not answering any questions about the Epstein stuff. He's not coming out with public statements, and he's not talking to the press. Now, he's still been seen in public, so it's not that he's in hiding or taking some kind of a medical treatment. Some people initially thought when he hadn't been responding that maybe this had finally got him and the stress had finally caused him to have another episode, another stroke perhaps. And, we are speculating that he has had a stroke in the past. Now, why would we speculate that? Well, if you've seen images of him recently, after he has a longer day, when he has been out in public doing things for more than a few hours, his face starts to droop. And he has very clear issues with balance. He talks about needing extra help going down like Air Force One steps, having to take it slower. He'll tumble. And then there was the issue in Japan that was noted about how it looked like he was dragging one of his feet. And what I know from people that I know personally who have had strokes, and of course this is anecdotal at best because I am not a medical professional, but I know what they said and what was said about them at the time is that sometimes when you have a stroke, you lose the ability to hit with your heel first and roll your foot, and you try to walk with the ball of your foot as the primary point of landing. And that way it does look like you are dragging your foot because you never actually lift your foot like you normally would. You're kind of hitting like that with your toes. So it looks like your foot is dragging across the ground. And all of these things are just signs that Donald Trump is not well. Well, you add in all of the stress of everything being released about the Epstein files. He was not able to get them blocked. He had called desperately trying to get Nancy Mace or Lauren Boebert or some of the other Republicans to back off the discharge petition, which did not happen. And people are speculating that this could be the event that finally does him in, and it still could. Potentially, with the stress of these votes taking place, he could end up having a situation where he has some major cardiac event. Maybe he has a stroke, heart attack. Who knows? He is not in the best of shape. You can tell that just by looking at him, and I can say that as somebody who is not in the best of shape. I am round, and I know this, and I admit it. I don't claim to be in, peak physical condition. Donald Trump does. He wants us to believe that he is in the same shape that he was 20 years ago, or better shape even. And we can tell that's not true, especially with his latest visit to Walter Reed about a month and a half ago, where as part of what they're calling a routine investigation, he got an MRI. Well, that is not something you do as part of a routine investigation. I've had physicals. I've never had an MRI, ever, for anything. And yet he claims it was part of his routine workup. He also talks about taking what he calls an aptitude test or an IQ test. And as he describes it, he is actually describing the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. Now, he talks about having to do pattern recognition, 1A, 2B, that kind of thing, naming three animals. And then, and he says that the questions get tougher as you go along. Well, they only get tough if you are facing some kind of impairment. Or there's the other option that he is just not very bright to begin with, and he is perfectly cognitively aware. He's just dumb. And I don't know which way we need to interpret that. But the fact that he has gotten multiple Montreal cognitive assessments, and we know he's had multiple because he talks about them. Donald Trump always fucks up. And one of the things he does is he lets things slip because he doesn't understand what he's talking about. For example, he talks about this aptitude test that we were just talking about, but it wasn't. It was a cognitive assessment. He even talked about taking one during his first term, that they had him take a cognitive assessment. And he talked about how easy it was, about how he had to remember 5 words and remember them for 5 minutes or whatever it was, and name three animals. He described again the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. The simple fact is he is getting multiple ones of these all the time, and now that they are doing it, they don't give them to you once and they're done unless you pass it perfectly. If they have reason to suspect you have some kind of cognitive issue, maybe a stroke, maybe a brain injury, or just the onset of dementia, or a combination of all of it, then they give it to you more often to try to progress things and see how things move forward. So they give you these tests as a comparison to make sure to see where you're at. Okay, have you gotten better? Have you gotten worse? And a lot of times you don't get worse. And typically they will tell the person, especially somebody with Donald Trump's temperament, who blows up at the slightest thing and wants to believe the best about himself. We've all seen how big of a narcissist he is. He's the smartest person in the room. He's the most physically fit, all of those things. And he won't accept anything else. And if you tell him the truth, he doesn't want to hear it. So, of course, they're going to tell him he aced the assessment. While in private, or maybe with his family, they are saying, look, there are problems here. We got to be looking out for this, this, and this. He is not well. And we know this. The stress of the Epstein files and everything coming out potentially could be what does him in. Not to mention the content of the Epstein files could also be what does him in politically. We are hearing that there is a reference from, I believe it was Mark Epstein, Jeff Epstein's brother, that was talking about an email, in one of these emails, something about, does Putin have the photos of Trump blowing Bubba? And there's people speculating that Bubba may be a reference to Bill Clinton. Now, I don't know how they get to that. Some people say it was his nickname or something that Epstein knew him by, but I haven't found any direct evidence other than other creators saying that. So I'm not sure who the Bubba is. And if there's evidence of that, that would be bad news for Donald Trump. He's not going to want that to get out because typical Republican, they don't like anybody in the LGBTQ spectrum. And this would mean that he is either in that spectrum, he is in that group, and which, no judgment from me, I don't care, but his own base would have a problem with that, or that he's at least done those things either against his will or for whatever reason, we don't know. Now, if this is true, that is going to be another politically bad blow for Donald Trump. Ultimately, with these Epstein files, how could this play out? Well, next week there is going to be a vote on the discharge petition. They have made it to 218 votes, or 218 signatures, I should say. So it is going to pass in the House. And one of the things we've been talking about is how does it pass? Does it pass at 218, the bare minimum required to pass it? Or is there more? Now, we are hearing some people are speculating, with closer ties to Capitol Hill than I have, that anywhere from 60 to 100 more Republicans could potentially break ranks and vote in favor of releasing the Epstein files. Well, if 100 representatives break ranks, that brings us to 318. So that 318 number would put us well over the 290 needed. to be the 2/3 that would override a presidential veto. So they would already have a veto-proof majority in the House of Representatives. And I don't see any reason why any member of the House of Representatives would vote for it the first time, and then if Donald Trump vetoes it, would vote against it the second, because they would be dealing with the same problem they have right now. They don't want to answer their voters. They don't want to answer their constituents for voting to protect the people on the Epstein files. They don't. They want to be able to walk away and say, okay, we voted to release the files. Now, if they don't get released for whatever reason, then that's different. If it gets vetoed by Trump and they can't override the veto, that's one thing. But the whole thing is they don't want to answer their voters and say, we decided to protect the perpetrators in the Epstein files, the criminals in the Epstein files. Their base wants those files released because they have been told for so long that it's only Democrats going to be in the files. It's only left-leaning people who do these awful things to children. And they have believed some of the worst possible things about liberals and Democrats. And they think we are all that way, that everybody who's left-leaning is like what they have been told. And they want the proof to prove us right. And Donald Trump ran on a campaign of releasing the Epstein files. Now, why would he do that? Well, he wants the files. He wanted to run on a campaign to release the files to protect himself. Okay, the idea was he'd run on releasing the files. He'd come in, they'd get in, they'd put somebody like Pam Bondi, like they did, in charge. She would say, "Oh, there's nothing to see here. There's nothing in the files. It's no big deal. Don't worry about it." And then they'd move on. Well, they tried that. It didn't work. And they don't know what to do. They are confused because stuff like that has always worked for Donald Trump. He's always been able to control the narrative. But this is the one story where his base absolutely wants the information, and they know there has to be something in there. But like I said, they are convinced it's nothing but Democrats. Now, Donald Trump wants to release the files, or he wants to keep the files hidden, I should say. He doesn't want them released. He wanted to run on that campaign so he could, protect himself, and it didn't work. Now, he's not talking about the files right now, but when he does, it is probably going to be something that will have an idea of where to look next in there. Donald Trump is notorious for fucking things up. When he says things, he says the worst possible version of what he could say. He just doesn't have an idea of how to get out of this situation. So he's going to say whatever he comes up with, and if they don't come up with a strategy soon, he is just going to respond. It is going to be an emotional response. So how does this play out? Well, here's one way that it could happen. They pass it in the House, it goes to the Senate. Now, we have not heard anything out of the Senate one way or the other on how this is going to happen. We don't even know if it's going to get a vote. Now, one of the things the Democrats could do potentially, and this is something I just thought of as I'm recording this, but they have an ability to bring forward a bill to pass the ACA credits. Now, this is just off the top of my head here. What if they try to connect the two? Bring a vote to extend the ACA credits, but also attach it to this Epstein petition. And because they have the ability to bring forward any bill they want, and they were promised a vote, well, now if they connect the two, John Thune, based on his own words, would have to have a vote on both, and it would, potentially it could still pass. So wouldn't that be something? House passes this Epstein file thing. They try to bury it. And then the Democrats say, okay, well, the bill we want to bring forward connects our bill on the ACA credits with the Epstein file vote. And then we'll see how you guys vote on it. And then they could actually be pressuring the Republicans, especially Senate Republicans, to vote in favor of releasing the Epstein files, because they know how bad not extending these ACA subsidies are. I still think it is a good chance that when it comes around to it, that the ACA subsidies are going to get extended. Maybe yet this year, maybe on this vote in December. And if this is how they do it, this would be beating the Republicans at their own game. Republicans love to put in poison pills when it comes to bills. You may remember back in what would it have been in 2024, there was a funding bill that the Democrats were trying to get through to give aid money to a bunch of our allies. Now, not all of it was cash. When we say aid money, depending on what we're talking about, if we are talking about military equipment, there's a good chance that a lot of the military equipment we give out ends up coming from our own stockpiles, and it's just stuff we are getting rid of. But they have to pass a bill authorizing the fact that it happens, right? So sometimes we just get rid of surplus, but they have to pass something, and it's an aid. They call it an aid package, and it's not actually us spending money, but they have to put a dollar value on it for accounting purposes, and then we give them our old surplus. Sometimes it's stuff that we are getting ready to retire anyway that are going to become surplus, and we just buy new for ourselves. Again, we put money then a value assigned to the stuff we are getting rid of. And then part of that value is us buying new for our military branches. And we put people to work on factory floors here in the United States, building the new equipment for ourselves. And then if it's just us giving them brand new stuff, again, those orders go through with American manufacturers. And again, we put people to work. So it's not just that we give them cash. Or if it comes to food, almost always when it comes to U.S. Aid, when it comes to food, under U.S. law, is if it is produced in the United States, we must buy it from American producers first, if possible. Now, there are some things that we are not able to either grow or produce here, or there could be things that we potentially cannot get from place to place in time before it expires. Now, most of that we've found ways around and we can handle it. But if it is an expiration thing, then we have to buy it from someplace locally, etc. But the primary thing is buying from American farmers, etc. when it comes to food aid. So they attached in this must spend funding package for foreign aid, including helping Ukraine in their war effort against Russia, the TikTok ban. And they thought that was going to be a poison pill. And Democrats said, okay, we see your bet, and we're going to pass it anyway. Now, they assumed they were going to win in November. They didn't, but I believe they thought they were going to win in November, and they could pass something after they won in November, reversing the TikTok ban before it came into effect. They thought they were going to play the Republicans. Well, here in this case, Democrats could play the Republican game. You know, you have Republicans backed into a corner about releasing the Epstein files. And they want to get ahead of it. They don't want to go into their districts and say, and in their states and say, yeah, I voted to keep the Epstein files hidden. Well, by attaching this to it, they may back them into a corner and force them to pass the ACA subsidies. Now, beyond that, yes, it would have to go back to the House and get passed again, but same problem in the House. How do they go to their districts and try to defend not releasing the Epstein files when their voters want them released, and then also go back to their voters and say, well, you know, I couldn't vote to release the Epstein files because they were going to make your health care cheaper. Really? That's a hard sell to your voters, and if you want to get reelected. So they could get it passed with potentially a veto-proof majority in the House. And now I don't know what the Senate could do, but if they get to 67 voters in the Senate, 67 senators to vote for it, well, they've now passed it. It's veto proof. So even if Donald Trump vetoes it, they could turn around and pass it around his veto. Now, some people, I talked yesterday about this idea, some people are floating that Donald Trump could use a pocket veto. And I looked into it. I just looked it up again to make sure that I got the idea right. Now, what is a pocket veto? A pocket veto is a president taking no action. Okay. If the president doesn't sign the bill, Normally, it would become law after 10 days. There is a 10-day window, not counting Sundays, in which if Congress passes this and Donald Trump refuses to sign it, that they could turn around and say, okay, it's a law, 10 days. But if he tries to veto it and Congress isn't in session, now normally they would only have so many days to respond to his veto. And typically what has historically happened is if Congress is out of session, the president vetoes something and it goes back to Congress, but they're not in session. Well, then it dies. It's considered dead and they can't pass it around his veto. The only way to pass it again around a veto would be for them to come back, vote on an entirely new bill, and pass it again. However, there's also a workaround around the pocket veto. One of the things about our system is there are tons of checks and balances, and they have built safety falls into this system. They've got safety nets there. So they have figured out, okay, a president does this, we want to do this. So what can they do to prevent a pocket veto? Well, it's something they already kind of do. They never fully adjourn. They only ever take 3-day breaks. And then they do pro forma sessions. So, and that's what they did the entirety of the government shutdown. They were holding pro forma sessions about every 3 days. That is where one member of the House and one member of the Senate, if the Senate is also gone, or whichever House is gone, shows up. They open the chamber like normal and say, okay, if nobody objects, because nobody is there to object, we're going to be out. We'll be back in 3 days. And they gavel out, they close the session. Now, they do that because there are rules in place like this pocket veto. This keeps Congress in session. And by designating somebody to be the person for that, say, 3-day window, to be the one to gavel in and gavel out, they would be the one designated to receive the bill from the president for both chambers. Okay? So what could happen? Well, if they pass this thing, Mike Johnson would designate somebody to run the pro forma session. And if they pick somebody who voted for the bill, they would probably say, okay, we've got a bill. We are going to be back in, and they would call up Mike Johnson and Mike Johnson could bring the House back into session. Would he? I don't know. But then he turns around. It would also have a chance to go through the Senate as well. And the Senate could come back into session. And then if they start the process of voting it around the presidential veto, this whole thing continues, or they could keep passing new legislation and trying to get it around his veto. They've gotten a discharge petition through once. They may do it again. Now, some people are suggesting that Mike Johnson may try to tie the discharge petition to the ACA vote and say, well, get rid of the ACA vote and I'll bring the discharge petition up for a vote. Doesn't work like that. Discharge petitions are designed to go around the Speaker of the House. So that's not even an option. Now, Hakeem Jeffries, House Minority Leader, is talking about using a discharge petition to bring forward a vote on the ACA credits, those ACA subsidies. Now, could he do what I just suggested potentially and connect it to the Epstein vote? Sure. They could also do a separate discharge petition and pass it as two separate bills. And it would only take like 4 Republicans to side with all Democrats, just like they did to pass the other discharge petition, the one that is going to be called for a vote to get a vote on the Epstein files. It wouldn't take much. So just because Donald Trump may veto this doesn't mean it's over. There are workarounds, and there are plans in place here. And just something I came up with off the top of my head of to where Democrats could play Republicans and back them into a corner for supporting the not only the Epstein files, but the ACA credits. And those are 2 of the biggest moves here. Now, if they do something like that and it ultimately works and we get the Affordable Care Act subsidies and the Epstein files released, by the end of the year, then it is conceivable that some of the heat would be off of the Democrats for caving and allowing the government to reopen. Now, I am not fully against the Democrats yet, even though those 8 need to be held accountable if this doesn't work. If they get something out of this deal by the end of the year and it still comes around, I'm willing to be a little more forgiving toward the Democrats and saying, okay, you got something in this deal. You got, the ACA credits extended. You got the Epstein files released. You've embarrassed Donald Trump. All of those things are good things. And now that we have the Epstein files being slowly released again by the Oversight Committee, that is something Donald Trump doesn't want. And that wasn't happening because Mike Johnson was keeping the House of Representatives out of session. Remember, the Oversight Committee is Republican-led. So all of these documents that are being released to the public, including Donald Trump's name, are being released by Republicans. This is not a good sign for Donald Trump. The Republicans are starting to break ranks. Now, what could happen going forward? Well, I'm seeing some people comparing this to Watergate and saying, well, it could take up to 2 years because that's what happened with Watergate. There's a difference between here and Watergate. One, Donald Trump has done way worse things than Nixon ever did. And two, midterms are right around the corner. And I know it took 2 years for Watergate and there would have been an election in between. But there's a difference. The Republican Party as a whole is viewed very unfavorably. Whereas with the Watergate scandal, it wasn't so much the entire party as it was Nixon. At least that's the way I understand it from my reading of things that happened during Watergate. I wasn't alive for Watergate. I only can know what I can read and watch in documentaries and in history books. But the way I understand it is the public outcry was not against the party as a whole as much as it was against one person. Whereas public opinion of Republicans as a whole is much worse this time, and they are worried about losing out in the House of Representatives and the Senate in big ways come the midterms. So how does this play out? Well, potentially, House passes the Epstein file vote. Okay, and let's take up the idea I had a little bit ago off the table for a minute. Let's just focus on the Epstein vote. They pass the Epstein files discharge petition. It goes to the Senate. That gets called for a vote, and that passes, and it goes to Donald Trump's desk for his signature, which he vetoes it. Okay? Because we know he is going to veto it. The only way he doesn't veto it is if somehow they are out of session and he tries to use a pocket veto and tries to prevent them from enacting it as law. Now, I don't know if they would actually go on full recess until 10 days after they have passed this thing, just to make sure they have a chance to pass it around his veto, because it's that important that they know if he vetoes it and they don't act, they would be held accountable to their constituents, to their voters, and they don't want that. So he vetoes it. It goes back to Congress. Now, they could pass it around his veto, which Donald Trump would get embarrassed. Of course, he'll threaten to primary and he'll do this and he'll do that, like he typically does. He'll try to bully Congress to get his way. However, what could happen here is that Donald Trump vetoes it, and they could look at him and go, okay, well, we're going to pass around your veto anyway, but also we're tired of you, Donnie. This thing is getting bad enough. We're taking heat for it. Clearly, you're in the files. We know what's there. It is our chance to get away from you and move on, trying to protect ourselves going into 2028 and 2026, for that matter, into the midterms. Now, they're worried about getting blown out in the midterms. There is a good chance that in the midterms, they lose the House by 40 or 50 seats. Okay, they're really worried about losing the midterms. So what do? Well, if they vote to impeach Donald Trump and then it goes to the Senate, they could remove Donald Trump. Go with J.D. Vance. And then they could try running on a campaign for the midterms of, well, reelect us again. We got rid of the other guy, give JD Vance a chance, but the only way he gets anything accomplished is with a favorable Congress. I could see them trying that. That's a typical strategy, and it makes some sense as to how you could maybe convince some voters of that idea. So would they get rid of Donald Trump? Possibly. And the Epstein files may be their vehicle to do it, above and beyond everything else. Now, Donald Trump gets impeached and removed. Now we go with JD Vance. Okay, sure. Now, like I said, would they do it? Possibly. But here's the thing. If it happens right now, between now and January 3rd, 2027, because I still think Democrats are going to win the midterms, that might change if they remove Donald Trump. That I don't know. I still don't know if that would be enough, given everything that the Republicans have done, but it definitely changes how the perception of the party is going to be. Okay. But anything that happens between now and January 3rd of 2027, when the new Congress takes over, is going to have to be Republican led. They're going to have to be on board for releasing anything, for doing an impeachment, whatever, because they're in control of both chambers. And I would highly doubt that a Republican in the House of Representatives would make a move such as an impeachment article against a sitting president of their own party, especially one who controls the cult like Donald Trump, unless they knew for a fact at 100% that they had the votes in the Senate to get rid of Donald Trump. I mean, why would you bring up, if you are a Republican, okay, and I know they're worried about getting reelected, and you've got some of them breaking ranks like Marjorie Taylor Greene, etc. But why would you bring forward articles of impeachment against your own sitting president unless you have the votes in the Senate to do it? Now, this isn't like bringing up articles of impeachment like the Democrats did against Donald Trump during his first term. They had reason to impeach Donald Trump twice. They did not have a favorable Senate to remove him from office. Okay. But with the difference there is they had legit charges, and they were trying to make a case to the Republicans to get rid of Donald Trump, yes. And on top of it, they were making a case to the American people about, okay, we're standing up to Donald Trump. The Republicans are just letting him do whatever he wants. And they were trying to make that case. That's different. Here is when you're taking party out of it and you're talking same party versus same party, typically you don't necessarily always protect your own party, but realistically, you would assume that your party would protect you a little bit. Now, Republicans have shown that they would protect Donald Trump regardless of what he has done before. So if they make that move, they're not going to embarrass themselves by bringing up articles of impeachment and then sending it over to the Senate that their party also controls just for it to die, just for them to vote to acquit him. I don't see that happening. I think they would have the votes, and they wouldn't even need all Republicans to vote in favor of it, because you got to assume that Democrats have 47 seats. They would only need 20 of the 53 senators. And I know that's a lot, but they would only need 20 senators to vote in favor of removing Donald Trump. And they could fix the mistake they made going all the way back to 2020. Remember, during his second impeachment, Democrats did impeach him for the things that they did on January 6th, 2021. And Mitch McConnell chose to not vote to convict. He even said in his speech afterward, after voting to acquit Donald Trump on the charges, he believed there were issues there and that Donald Trump probably should have been convicted. But he chickened out based on the fact that by the time the proceedings had wrapped up, Donald Trump was out of office, and said, well, it's a moot point. He's out of office. Thing is, if they would have voted to convict, and I think they're probably regretting that vote every single day, if they would have voted to convict him back then, one of the two punishments that can be applied as a conviction for impeachment in the Senate. Remember, this is a political process, not criminal. They cannot impose any sort of civil fine. They cannot enforce any sort of punitive incarceration, nothing like that. This is a purely political process. There are only two possible outcomes from an impeachment if they are found guilty. And the guilty person can get one or both, that being removal from office and a lifetime ban on holding public office again, at least I believe at the federal level. I'm not 100% sure that an impeachment removal conviction, where you're banned from holding a federal office, would prevent you from holding a local or state office. However, with that on your record, it is very unlikely you would ever be elected to those kind of positions ever again. I mean, we have never successfully impeached and removed a president. We've come close, the closest being Andrew Jackson with one vote. And people were actually surprised because he was not very well liked that he didn't get removed. But he was able to somehow stave it off by one vote. So in theory, the Epstein files may be the thing that gets Republicans to be able to impeach and remove Donald Trump. Now, why would they use that as a reason to get rid of him? Well, the base. The MAGA base wants the Epstein files released. We've talked about it a lot. And because they want the Epstein files released, they want anybody connected to be held accountable. And Republicans are trying to find a way, I think, to get away from Donald Trump. They've slowly been breaking ranks with him on certain things here and there, very small things. You have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out and voicing her objections to things that are going on in the party. You have Senate Republicans not getting rid of the filibuster, those kind of things. They're slowly starting to crack here. Now we're hearing 60 to 100 Republicans may vote to release the Epstein files. The cracks are forming. They want to get away from Donald Trump, I believe. But they don't know how because he has his base. The 30 to 35% of Republican voters that will not vote unless Donald Trump's involved, or that only vote on Trump-backed candidates or whatever. Some of these people had never voted before, period. They had never voted, and they had talked about, politics maybe, but they never felt the need to vote. He got them to come out and actually go to the polls, which increased Republican numbers. And if you turn on Donald Trump, they're going to take it personal. We're talking about the ones that have made Donald Trump their entire personality. And they may never vote for a Republican again, or any Republican that turned on Trump at the very least. So what happens? The Republicans in Congress may be trying to use the Epstein files, the other issue these same voters care about, as a way to distance themselves from Donald Trump, to break ranks, remove him from office, and go forward with having a different president. Now, that would be J.D. Vance. And I'm going to go over it again because it bears repeating. Just because J.D. Vance becomes president does not mean that Mike Johnson would become vice president. They do not automatically move up one step, because if they did, that would be pure chaos. That would not mean, if everybody just advanced one step, Mike Johnson would become VP. Well, that would move Chuck Grassley from President pro tem of the House or of the Senate to Speaker of the House. You can't just move people from chamber to chamber. It doesn't happen. The only way Mike Johnson would become anywhere in the line of succession is if something would happen to J.D. Vance before Vance gets a pick approved for his own VP. Now, depending on when they move away from Donald Trump determines what happens. Now, I had been saying it takes 2/3 of both chambers of Congress. I did look it back up. I was also slightly wrong. I believe it is actually just a majority. I thought it was 2/3, much like a veto, but it takes a majority of both chambers in order to pass the pick for a new vice president. So JD Vance would get to pick his own VP. Now, could he select somebody completely wild and crazy? Yes. However, with the thin majority they have in the House, and with as divided as their party is right now, it's entirely possible he doesn't go with somebody too crazy. He's probably going to want to pick somebody, definitely not MAGA, because MAGA is losing popularity as a whole. And he's probably going to want to pick somebody more establishment, more middle of the road. The name that keeps coming up that I keep hearing, and that comes to mind because he's one of the last normal Republicans, is Brian Kemp of Georgia. Entirely possible that he could become Vance's VP. Now, I don't know that he would take it. I don't know that he would accept, because you can't just pick somebody and say, well, I nominate them and hold the vote. They have to be on board for it, obviously. So JD Vance would get to pick his own VP. They would get passed through confirmation hearings in both chambers of Congress. And then they would take the oath of office and they would become the vice president. Okay. And the Republicans would then move forward away from Donald Trump. Now, what would that gain them? Well, if they do it before the midterms, especially if they do it, I usually say in politics, you have about a 6-month memory. So if they do it around May at the latest of next year, as they're barreling toward the midterms, they could potentially run on a campaign of, well, JD Vance just got the job, and if you vote in Democrats, he's not going to have a favorable Congress. He's not going to get anything done, and you won't get anything through Congress. So, vote for Republicans and keep Republicans in power, because JD Vance needs to be able to get his own agenda through. It's possible. I don't know that that would be enough to avoid the blue wave that is coming, because we've been proved that, Republicans can't lead. They can't lead. We had the government shut down for, what was it, 45 days, 44 days, something like that, all because they couldn't come to any sort of an agreement. You had Mike Johnson keeping the House of Representatives out that entire time while not negotiating. So Republicans could use this as a way to gain sympathy in the midterms. Now, if they don't move on until after the midterms and they've gotten blown out, they could still use it as a way for sympathy. Again, same problem. Well, they had a Democratic-controlled Congress. JD Vance wasn't able to get anything done. Give him a Republican-controlled Congress in 4 more years, and he'll fix everything, because that's always the Republicans' mantra. They break it, and then they say they can fix it. Or they break it bad enough, Democrats try to fix it, they don't get it fixed fast enough, and then Republicans say, well, they didn't get it done fast enough, we can fix it. And they come in and they break things even worse. Now, when Democrats are back in control of both chambers of Congress and the presidency, so just because they win the midterms, okay, and I don't think it's possible they get both chambers of Congress, but I don't think it is possible that they get a super majority, a veto-proof majority of 2/3 of both chambers. That math is pretty hard. I don't even know if they picked up every seat available in Congress this time, in the Senate, if they would be able to have 67 senators. Now, picking up 4 is potentially doable. Enough to gain control, but I don't know that they could pick up enough to get around a presidential veto. But after 28, if they have both chambers of Congress and the presidency, it may take more than 2 terms to fix all of the damage that is done. Now, I saw somebody on TikTok suggesting that they need to run on an idea of passing some amendments, specifically around the legalization of marijuana. Now, one of the things that the Republicans stuck back into this bill was a reclassification of marijuana, classifying it higher, and basically undoing what Barack Obama did, which was decriminalizing it And all they basically said was, well, it is still illegal nationally. We're just not going to go after any of the states that have passed it as a legal form of uh, use, as recreational use marijuana. And you now have billions of dollars of tax money being generated in a bunch of states. You have it's a $1 billion industry nationwide, multi-billion dollar. And when it comes to that, this administration, the Republicans, want to use that and go forward and say, hey, we're going to, we want to go after it again. Now, I think that's going to be widely unpopular because 38 states have some kind of recreational or medical marijuana use on the books. Now, 38 states also happens to be the magic number required to approve a constitutional amendment. So if they can get something through Congress and get it back to the states, potentially 38 states would be already on board for adding a 28th Amendment to the Constitution, which may involve marijuana. Now, I know there's some confusion or some irritation about whether or not there already is a 20th Amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment. And the problem with it is it was supposed to have been ratified within so much of a time frame, and then there was some question about whether or not it got extended right. And even though enough states have ratified it, there is a legal question about whether or not it was ratified within the right time frame for it to become law. That is the other thing they could run on, is potentially running on an equal rights amendment and making sure either they pass it in Congress again to make sure that the one that was already ratified gets considered and counted and added, or that they try to just bring forward a new one and pass a new equal rights amendment. So those are a couple of things that could potentially happen. Now, we've been talking a lot about them gerrymandering, okay? Texas gerrymandered out or attempted to gerrymander out 5 democratically controlled seats. Now, I say attempted because we won't know until the midterm elections. I keep saying Democrats could win by 40 or 50 seats. So the gerrymandering may not work. But there are states that have come out and they have countered some of what the Republicans have tried to do. So Texas redraws their maps without any sort of voter approval, just the legislature saying we're doing it, and they pass it in a special session, and they redraw out 5 seats, making it so that they dilute their strongholds where they normally win with 65, 70% of the vote, and now they're only going to win by 50, 55% of the vote, in theory, and they move those voters into different districts, hoping that they can actually flip that district now. And instead of it going to a Democrat, it's going to go to a Republican, assuming they all vote the way they had been voting. Okay. Well, California comes out, they pass Prop 50. Gavin Newsom took it to the voters and said, hey, temporarily until the next census, let's redraw our maps this way. And then it will go back to the independent commission that will draw them based on the census, etc. And they asked the voters, and Republicans could not stop that at the ballot box. Okay, it passed with like 60% of the vote. But see, Republicans do what Republicans do, and they turned around and they sued. But it's now being led by the Department of Justice. The Trump administration is suing California, trying to say that the redistricting of California is unfair, that it's ignoring the will of the voters, it is ignoring the way it should be, and that basically that they shouldn't be allowed to redistrict mid census period, mid decade, which is ironic considering that Texas started this whole mess. So there's going to be a lawsuit. I don't think it goes anywhere. I think because of the fact that it was put up to the voters and the voters passed it, I think they actually did it right in California, that they turned around and they get the ability to redistrict. Republicans are going to lose this one, but it may not even matter. The voters could turn out in such a number that we could actually have, instead of gerrymandering, what they call dummymandering. Dummymandering is this idea that you dilute your voting base. So instead of having strongholds with like 65 to 70% of the vote where you know you're going to win, okay, now you have now your strongholds are down to 55-ish% or whatever, and you've diluted your voting base, and now you've given the other party enough hope to turn out and to vote in favor of the Democratic candidate, and you don't actually gain those seats. And in fact, some of those strongholds where you would normally have won with 65%, you've given their side hope. Now, maybe it is possible that the Democrats end up picking up not only the 5 seats they would have had originally, that those seats stay Democrat, but maybe they pick up 2 or 3. So they actually gain seats because you have diluted your voting base. It's entirely possible. Now, over in Utah, a court has approved a new map, and Republicans are losing their minds. Now, they went and they looked at it and they said the original Utah map was unconstitutional, and they redrew the map, which should give Democrats at least one district in or around Salt Lake City. So that offsets potentially Missouri, where Missouri redrew their maps and tried to eliminate one Democrat seat. And you have other states talking about it. I mean, if we turn out and we vote in such large numbers, it may not matter as far as what is going on. But the DOJ is trying to sue to prevent California from being able to redistrict. Okay, this is typical Republican. They couldn't win initially at the ballot box. So now they're going to try to turn to the courts, and they're going to try to overturn the will of the people. Well, that's what they tried to do with 60-plus court cases after the 2020 general election when Joe Biden won. Granted, that was all mostly done by Donald Trump, but they tried to sue 60-plus times trying to overturn the will of the people. That didn't happen. Then they tried to go after the Capitol on January 6th, trying to prevent the certification of an election. When they don't get their way, they try to cheat to get their way. Now, is it possible that they try to gerrymander other states? Yes. Problem is, there's not too many states left that are Republican controlled where they can pick up very many seats. Why? Because they've already gerrymandered their seats to hell and back. Their states are already very heavily gerrymandered. And even in a state like Texas, where they just drew out 5 districts, if you actually look at Texas, and you know, I don't know how many independents there are in Texas and independents that lean Republican, but registered Democrats versus registered Republicans, I believe there are more registered Democrats than Republicans in Texas. But they don't win because they've been gerrymandered to hell and back. And then because they've been gerrymandered to hell and back, they don't believe they can win, and it's a never-ending cycle. They don't think they can win, so they say, okay, well, I'm not going to win. So they don't even attempt to run. And then when they don't attempt to run, they get beat. The Republicans win again. And it just keeps going. Now, I think in the 2026 midterm elections, we are going to see some major surprises. Okay, I think Democrats could take the House by 40 to 50 seats. That's entirely possible. I think you could have some states flip purple. Some states that hadn't been purple for a while, like here in Iowa. I think there's a good chance Iowa goes purple for the first time since Obama was president. And you could see some districts flip that hadn't been blue in a while. Now, I'm only thinking 2 or 3 of Iowa's districts go blue. I would be drastically surprised if Iowa District 4 turns blue. Why? Because we couldn't turn blue when we were running a Democrat against Steve King. Steve King, that racist piece of shit, he was one of the worst Republicans out there at the time when we couldn't beat him every 2 years. He kept coming around. And then you had his replacement, who's been in for, 4, 6, 8 years, something like that. He's no better. And now he's not running for re-election, sure. But the problem is we haven't been able to beat him either. And I thought we were going to actually make gains last year, and we didn't even come close in Iowa District 4. So I think it's possible two of the three districts here in Iowa flip. But then you also got to remember we've got a very popular Democrat running for the Democratic nomination as well as the governorship. Um, Obviously, the Democratic nomination for the governor's race in Rob Sand. And I think Rob Sand has a good chance of winning. Now, he is talking about doing things uh, and going above the two-party system. And he's again talking kind of like how some of the other Democrats are talking, and he's saying some of the right things. Being a governor for everybody, making sure that even though he is a registered Democrat, that it's not just red versus blue. It's not us versus them. We have to make sure that we take care of our people and doing the best things for our state. So I think come the midterms in 2026, both in the federal elections and the statewide elections that are going to be happening, we are going to have to see. And I think you're going to see a lot of surprises. I think Democrats take the House by 40, 50 seats minimum. We'll see if they actually pick Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker when they do. And if they pick up 4 seats in the Senate, they have control of the Senate, which is important because as I was in a live yesterday, somebody was talking about the idea of Thomas and Alito retiring. Okay, if they have control of the Senate and Thomas and Alito try to retire ahead of the 2028 general election, Democrats can do what Mitch McConnell did and hold the seats open. Or they could also sit there and say, yeah, we'll hold a vote and vote down any of Donald Trump's far right extremist picks. Could you imagine what would happen if there becomes an opening and he tries to put up Judge Cannon out of Florida as a potential Supreme Court justice? And the Democrats could turn around and say, okay, we'll hold that vote, flat out reject it and be done with it. Or they could just do what Mitch McConnell did, have it sit on a desk and do nothing with it, have it die in committee like they did with Merrick Garland back in 2016, and just say, nope, too close to an election, and keep those seats open for the Democrat that runs. I think controlling the Senate is almost going to be more important than having the House, because I think getting the House is more of a foregone conclusion. I think the Democrats should put their effort on flipping the Senate back in 26, but getting it in 26 isn't going to be enough. Then they need to hold it in 28 as well as maintaining the House so they can have a Democratic president in 29 when they take office with a favorable Congress so they can start to get a bunch of shit done. And one of the first things they should do is, and I don't know if they would have to have the president involved in this or if it's something Congress can do because they control the purse strings and they could do it without the president, and they could maybe do it if they get control of both houses of Congress in the midterms. But at some point, there needs to be a forensic investigation into the federal budget, into all government offices, agencies, etc., looking at the books and trying to figure out what money has gone where, because there are questions now about where some of the money is coming for some of these things, how things are getting approved, etc. It needs to be looked into. And I think that's one of the things Democrats should do as a priority the next time they're in power. Like I said, I don't know if they can do it just with holding Congress or if they would need the president to be involved as well. Okay, so that's going to do it for this episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. As always, I thank you for taking the time to join me today and listen along as I explain things as I see them. There's going to be even more coming out, about the Epstein files as people are digging through these 20,000 pages of documents. And as more and more Republicans start to break ranks, the walls are going to be closing in on Donald Trump. We'll have to see how he reacts and what he chooses to do in response to the Epstein files. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I'll be back tomorrow because there's always something to talk about.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.